Do you know the 14 traits of successful chiropractors? We've interviewed some of the top chiropractors in the industry and have identified the common traits that they all share. Jump on over to www.chirobusinessmojo.com to get your free report today.
Welcome to the Chiro Business Mojo podcast, where we deconstruct the methods, marketing, and mindset of successful business people and chiropractors from around the world. And now your host, Dr. Richard Day.
Yes, I am Dr. Richard Day, and this is the Chiro Business Mojo podcast. Thanks so much for checking in with me today. Well, today is part 2 of the exciting interview with Mr. Garrett Gunderson. You know, chiropractors, we are business people in addition to being healers. We're always interested in getting those new patients in the door, but are we leaving money on the table elsewhere? Are we leaking money, so to speak, through holes in our practices? We might be. Check out what Mr. Garrett Gunderson has to say about that, about retirement, and much more in part 2 of our interview. In addition to student loan, chiropractors also are not sure about how they're going to retire. What advice do you have for chiropractors on really setting themselves up for a comfortable retirement?
So, first off, retire the concept of retirement. It's a dangerous dogma that has absolutely hurt so many people. Here's why. First of all, they're teaching someone like a chiropractor to sell their business and retire. Most businesses sell for a fractional multiple, meaning less than 1 year's revenue. Okay, now you got to take that money and invest it. Where do you invest it? And you got to create enough cash flow from that investment to be able to live your life. But the problem is if taxes go up and you're just living off interest, that cuts into your life. If interest rates don't cooperate and they remain low, it becomes an even more miserable retirement. Or finally, if inflation exists as it probably will, it starts to confiscate your purchasing power year by year. So retirement, in its traditional sense, there's a 98% failure rate for chiropractors. They turn age 65, 98% of them don't have enough income that would come in if they didn't show up to work to cover their expenses. So instead, let's reframe this and create economic independence instead of retirement. Economic independence can happen in as short as 3 years. Okay, there are outliers. We've had people do it in 362 days, but they're freaks of nature, kind of like a professional athlete for money, I guess. Not something to expect. Or it could take as long as 7 years. Those are people who kind of have to dig out of a hole and those kind of things. Mm-hmm. But this is what you do instead. The first thing is you go and recover cash. You find the 4 I's. Did you overpay the IRS? Did you overpay your interest? Did you overpay on insurance? And did you overpay on investments? The answer is yes in some of those categories. So that's money that now comes back into your life right now. The second thing is strategically engineer wealth. Find out where there's cracks, where there's holes, where there's leaks in the bucket. Find out where you're set and where you're not set financially. And build that financial house where you actually have a blueprint so you know what to do. If you don't have that blueprint, it's hard to find where the treasure map is. It's hard to know how to build the financial house. Then the third step is accelerate investment income. Every investment you have that's not creating cash flow, turn it into a cash flow investment so it can start contributing towards covering your expenses without you having to show up to work. Then the fourth step, and this is critical, scale your business revenue. You're listening to this podcast. I assume that you already want to scale or are scaling your business revenue. But there's a huge strategic advantage of those that own a business over those who don't in order to create economic independence, because you could go and say, in what ways can I increase my value, or in what ways can I reach more people, in what ways can I make more money without having to show up to work, and you can start to build a business. And that business is the most insider advantage to building wealth, because 92% of the population, 91%, that is worth $5 million or more owns a business. So scale business revenue, invest back into you, invest back into your business, invest in people, processes, and automated and technological procedures that allow you to scale and create some level of automation. Then fifth, make it count. B.J. Palmer said, the bigger your vision, the more often you should travel. Make it count as you take care of yourself. You treat yourself as your greatest asset, not a stock, not a bond, not even your practice. You say, have I managed my energy? Am I taking time off and rejuvenating and relaxing? Am I living a life that I love? What is my legacy going to be? You start to think about yourself. It doesn't mean you're selfish. It just means that you have more to give if you focus on that. So you recover cash, strategically engineer wealth, you accelerate investment income, you scale business revenue, and you make it count. That's the framework. And you can get there a whole lot faster. Then when you get to economic independence, now think about, do you want to scale back and work less? But don't just retire, because if you retire from purpose, you will find when people lose purpose, they lose control of their money, and they end up having a hard time with relationships because there's only so many days you could drink a Corona at the beach. There's only so many rocks that you could fling into water. There's only so many lunches that you can sit there and have. Make sure that you're still engaged. The wealthiest people in the world could have retired long ago, but they still choose to do something because their purpose was bigger than the money-making activity. The purpose was the reason they did it. Money was part of the ingredient, and an important part at that, because if it didn't exist, they would run out of fuel. But make sure that you don't get rid of the vehicle. I actually encourage some people to retire in business. Retire from the things that you hate doing, hire that out over time, and then work less time, but still own the business so you have a tax advantage. And so that if inflation or taxes or interest rates aren't cooperating, you can spend a little bit more time in something you know and understand, like your business, instead of dabbling in things that you have no clue about, called the stock market.
There's a lot there. Appreciate you sharing all of that. And I'm going to go back and listen to this podcast when it's over with and write some of this down, because I think there's so much great information you're sharing. I want to touch on one of the things you said, and that's really investing in yourself and your happiness along the way. I think a lot of chiropractors are operating, and have been for maybe a long time, from a scarcity mindset. And Sean Acor wrote a book called The Happiness Advantage. He's given one of the most popular TED Talks on it, that really says that work on your happiness, and then other things will come, instead of saying, I will be happy once I do all of these other things.
Yep. Be, do, have instead of have, do, be. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, if we're saying, once I have this, then I'll do that, then I'll be this. That's like an employee saying to you, once I have a raise, then I'll be more productive, and then I'll be a better employee. No. If they're an amazing employee, then they're going to have that raise, because of the things that they're doing.
Right.
Not the other way around. And so I do think that having certain rituals in life when we start our day that are important for happiness, whether it's, I love using the 5-minute journal because it helps me with gratitude. I love writing handwritten thank you cards. I love when I do my meditation and when I work out. I found after taking, I did some stem cell injections for one of my now client. It's funny how many of my doctors end up being clients, but it's like I took a week off of working out, but then I let the other things slip, like my gratitude journal and like writing thank you cards. And then all of a sudden I found that I started eating less healthy. And then I started my wife said I was grouchier, and my internal dialogue started to get more negative. So I think it's critical to do what Sean talks about. And I heard him speak last year. He's probably the fastest speaker in the world that I've ever heard. Like, I sometimes get really fast. Compared to him, I'm like on, 33. He's on 45, if we remember the old record players. But, yeah, so I totally agree with that sentiment.
Well, let's get a little bit more into the big picture thinking. You've obviously been very successful in life, but we learn oftentimes more from our failures. Can you share with us one of your failures and the lessons you learned from that?
So let me just pick one of the failures. I've had several. I only really consider them a failure if I would have given up. But my mistakes, my expensive tuitions. Well, the most expensive tuitions are usually when we go out and experience something. Mm-hmm. I remember, the day really clearly. It was June 9th of 2006, and I was getting up to do my morning ritual and about to work out, and my home phone rang. I still couldn't tell you what my home phone number is, so it's really weird to have a home phone ring at that time of day. I didn't even answer it, thinking it must have been a wrong number, but then it stopped and it started again. So I picked it up, and it was one of my business partners, Mike. He called me from Los Angeles saying, hey, our company plane left St. George last night, and we haven't heard anything from Ray and Les, our partners, or the pilot. I was like, okay. Kind of took a second to sink in, so I turned on the TV, and they had confirmed a plane had crashed into Utah Lake. And so I had my 2 business partners die, and so that Friday, instead of going and doing my radio show, I went straight to one of the widows' homes and did what I could to help out. It was a tough situation, and just figured let me contribute. But then somewhere in my head, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make sure that we keep all 42 employees. I'm going to be back on the radio Monday morning. We're going to show people, I'm going to continue my partner's legacy. And that might sound noble, that might sound great, but it was very erroneous thinking. It wasn't about my legacy. Now all of a sudden I'm talking about their legacy. So I was getting up at 5 a.m. I was going down to Utah County, which was about an hour away from my house. And over the next 4 months, I gained 22 pounds because I stopped working out. And because of the stress, I'll even admit, this was back in 2006. I probably haven't been there since then. But I was eating hot fudge sundaes from McDonald's, which is just, sad to admit, like almost every day on the way home, because I was just in a really bad place because I wasn't doing anything for myself. I was doing it in the name of for everyone else. And then I remember in November, like having my assistant walk out and go, "Hey, you're double booked for the next hour. What do you want to do?" And that's a pretty simple thing. I would look at normally who are the two people, make a call, see if one of them had a flexible schedule, and reschedule someone. If they both showed up, then have someone else on the team support me and maybe be a little bit more efficient with the meetings. I mean, there's so many easy solutions, but I was so taxed and tired. I'm like, I don't know. And I just sat down and I just remember feeling hot and bothered and fever and just like, this sucks. And it was about to be Thanksgiving. So I'm driving with my wife to Price, Utah, which is 2 hours southeast. We're driving in a Bentley, so it looks like we have all the wealth in the world. But about halfway through the drive, we're going through this cool Spanish Fork Canyon. Love this drive. I remember it even as a kid. Great drives with my family, my grandparents. It has some really pretty parts to it. But my wife and I are talking. We have some of our best conversations on these drives. And she's telling me I'm an extraordinary radio show host. That felt good. Telling me I'm an extraordinary speaker, an extraordinary business person. But then she looks back at my 1-year-old and looks back at me and she says, "But you're really just an ordinary husband and father." And so, that really hit me. And instead of getting defensive, which even though I felt it, I got more emotional, I realized she was right. And I had this belief that you just couldn't really have it all, that you just had to have sacrifice in life. But at this point, I was willing to sacrifice business in the name of, my family because what she said. So I just told the executive team in the Provo office, "Hey, I'm not coming back. I'm going to start officing in Salt Lake, but I'm going to take a month off, so I'm not going to be answering my phone." This was a 6-day transition, so I'm not going to be answering my phone. I'm not going to be answering my emails. I'm just going to focus on my family and take care of myself for a while. And you know what? I started getting a lot more energy. I started spending time with my wife and son. And when they would go to bed, I was still energized. So I actually wrote Killing Sacred Cows, my New York Times bestseller, that month, December of 2006, even though I had been working on it for 2 years and only got 72 pages in before because I was trying to fit it in. But now I realized you can have it all. You just have to define what all is, and that there was no such thing really as balance, but there is something called harmony. There is something called depth, and there's something about being present and in the moment. And I look back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I couldn't go anywhere without thinking about business incessantly. Couldn't go to the gym and work out. Couldn't go to church. Couldn't do anything without having business consume every thought of my mind because I had violated the rule of taking care of myself as the greatest asset. I had violated the rule of having, depth in my life, and that wealth didn't just come from money and being so competitive in business. It really came from living a purpose that mattered. It came from having a good mindset. It came from having good physical health. And it also came from having a good social life. So I look at wealth as a 5-track dimension. I learned it from that experience: financial, spiritual, mental, physical, and social. And you know what? I'm never completely 100% perfect in those areas, but I call it in flow or dialed in when I'm playing at 90% at minimum in each one of those areas. And when I get out of whack that way, then I know who can I spend time with, who can I ask questions to, where can I create accountability, where can I create rhythms or systems. I take the same principles that made me successful in business and apply it to any other area of my life.
Oh, thank you for sharing such a personal story. And you're exactly right. It's easy to forget that and get lost in the business world, but certainly people are irreplaceable in the relationships with them, family and friends as well. Let's talk a little bit about the big picture of success. When you think of the word success, is there a particular person that comes to mind?
I could tell you, this may be an interesting way to answer this. I could tell you who doesn't, when I hear success, I can tell you what comes to mind for a lot of people because I've heard so many interviews. People think Elon Musk, they think Steve Jobs, they think like these kind of iconic people in the business world. But the more you look into their lives, the bigger the train wreck they are in so many areas. Like to have that level of genius is almost lopsided. Like sure, they were successful in one area, but is it really successful in other areas? To me, you got to go with those 5 tracks. So I think that it's almost like the difference between success and not success, or the difference between wealthy and truly wealthy is, we could find people on the Forbes 400, and I would say that maybe 25 of them might be truly wealthy, where they have deep, meaningful relationships, where they love what they do, where they have a good mindset and they're really looking to contribute to the world, where they, where they've got their health and they're taking care of that. Yeah, having a lot of money is important. That's called being rich when you have a lot of money. People that say money is not important usually don't have a lot of it. And I look at money a lot like I look like at air. When it's overly abundant, I don't tend to worry about it or think about it that much. But when it's not, when it's sparse or scarce, it sure is on my mind a lot. So I think money is critically important, but it's only one dimension to success. Success is living in depth in those 5 categories that I talked about and having that harmony in that life. That's success. I've had a mentor in the past that said success means continually setting and accomplishing objectives. Well, that's probably a good definition for him. But for me, it's am I playing at 9 out of 10 at least in those 5 areas? If I am, that's pretty successful. And if I'm not, all right, then I have room to grow, but it doesn't mean I'm not a success. Like I'm done. In my 20s, I measured my success based upon did I have more than everyone else or who I knew. The problem with that is you're always going to find people that have more, or you're not going to grow because you're going to spend time with people who need you more than you need them. And I think it's good to have a mix of both. It's great to have people that you can just absolutely contribute to anytime you're around, but it's great when there's people that can contribute to you as well. And, I look at a lot of my wealth exists in the experiences I have and the relationships I have, and especially those relationships that matter most. I look at when I neglected my marriage because of business when I was 7 years into my relationship, and, I'm glad that my wife called me out. I'm glad, that took a while it wasn't just having that epiphany and everything was perfectly fine. There was some recovery, there were some issues, It probably took till 2010 to really be where we were rocking it and had a great enough relationship that people asked about our relationship all the time, and where I created a vision for that, where I said, I want to be a premier romantic and an extraordinary husband. I realized I had a vision in other areas of my life, but not my marriage. So it's amazing how many principles are out there that are so apparent when we apply them to business, but elusive yet obvious when we apply it to the rest of our life. We could take any of these principles chiropractors teach in health, and you could apply those principles to wealth, and they're the same principle underlying. Different application. The context is health versus wealth, but I can tell you this. If you have health with no wealth, that's not that fun. If you have wealth with no health, then that's a much bigger problem, right? It's like that proverb that says, a man with his health has millions of dreams. A man without has but one. And I think that chiropractic has really helped me out to see the importance of health and helped me to proactively take care of it.
Well, this train is approaching its final destination, and before we roll in, we do have a few final thoughts. Do you have a favorite book? You've written some great books. Do you have a favorite book that you'd like to recommend for our listeners?
Favorite book? Like, are you talking about books I wrote or other books?
Either.
Well, I think the classic that I wrote was Killing Sacred Cows. I do think when Budgeting Sucks comes out, it's going to be my most profound work because it's got so much application in it, where Killing Sacred Cows is like permission to succeed. It's that verbiage and language to help people go, this is how I always thought, but now I have permission to think this way because everybody's been telling me I'm weird or I shouldn't be thinking this way. So Killing Sacred Cows is kind of like that manifesto to help people succeed in a lot of ways. I still feel like that's great. The problem is it's pretty much out of print. I think there's 3 new copies on Amazon. You have to buy it used. But that's okay. What Would the Rockefellers Do is my newest book. And you look at the Vanderbilt family that, basically 54 years after Cornelius died, even though he had more money than the U.S. Treasury, Vanderbilt died broke 54 years later. They didn't pass it on from generation to generation. Now you've got, the Rockefellers on their 6th generation. They donated $50 million to charity. And whether, you dig into their life and agree with, how they spend their money, the key is they're in the 6th generation of keeping it alive. So there's something to that. And there's a way that they earn interest and pay it to a family bank. There's philosophies and thought processes. And so I captured that in my new book, What Would the Rockefellers Do? If you go to Amazon, it's $1,000. So I recommend instead going to wealthfactory.com/Rockefellers, plural, Rockefellers, /book, and you can get it for free. wealthfactory.com/Rockefellers, /book. I think it's a fascinating read, even though it's a financial book, and it gets into a lot of the strategy of how you can start to apply this to create perpetual trust and to really take care of yourself from a risk management and building the right financial team, and a strategy called cash flow banking, which is something I've been using as kind of my never fail me strategy since 1998. That's been the most consistent thing in my financial life.
Earlier in the interview, you mentioned a free gift for chiropractors. Where can they take advantage of that?
Well, you can grab the book, but you also get this mega kit. We put it together recently for Robert Kiyosaki, and it's called our mega kit. So I just happen to know the site and everything, and it's a freebie. It's wealthfactory.com/megakit, MEGAKIT. What's in there are like cash flow guides, ways to improve your cash flow. There's investor scorecards, figuring out how to reduce your risk when you invest money, or how to start thinking about creating cash flow when you invest. I mean, there's 3 killer resources in there that they used to only be available. One of them in my $7,500 program back in 2007. Now it's available because we just keep growing and expanding and creating more value for the people because we practice everything I've been teaching here. So feel free to grab that. Benefit from that. Obviously, we get to know you that way. We do free webinars that don't sell anything. We do webinars that sell stuff. I mean, we obviously want to make the right people clients, but we look to do that through giving you value and helping you improve your financial life and becoming a partner that way.
Well, we will link to all of this great content and information in our show notes at ChiroBusinessMojo.com. Mr. Garrett Gunderson, thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time with us here today.
Hey, I appreciate you doing this and having me on, and really glad that Craig connected us, and hopefully, people will be able to at least take one thing within 24 hours, put it on the ground, and have that make a difference in their life. Whether they ever meet with me or my firm or ever get to know us, if you just take and implement something, and feel free to spread the word and teach other people. I'd like to see this get out there. I'd like to see 1 million people get to economic independence.
Thanks for listening to the Chiro Business Mojo podcast at www.chirobusinessmojo.com.